2011, Port Corporation approached Titaro White to do an assessment of where we're at. Titaro White ran a cultural center down in New Zealand. He was Maori. The cultural center, Tapuia, has been in existence since 1921. Well, here's some stats that are different than ours. 600,000 Maori live on an island, or 15% of the population. They contribute 42% to the gross national economy. Every corporation, federal government, museums, they don't have reserves. They decided to go mainstream right off the bat. They have the Treaty of Waitangi. They still have all the same social pathologies that we have, which is common to all people that are colonized. But they contribute 42% to the gross national economy, and they're 15% of the total population. They have their own schools, their own newspapers, their own television programs, their own news in their language. And they control 62% of fishery down there. So it gives you a little bit of insight into where we're at up here right now. Because when Titaro came up here, had the idea that we're still culturally intact, we still have our hereditary structure intact, we're still feasting property, we're still passing all our history and all our knowledge on property. I said, no, that's not the case. I said, Tsm'syens are probably some of the most colonized group on the coast here. We had the fort here, we had the institution of missionaries. They targeted the Łagigyet and the Łagigyet right away, so they were the first ones to convert over right away. Then they started pushing aside the culture. My grandfather in 1914 was paid $20 in gold to symbolically chop down the last of the totem poles in our village, along with the other Łagigyet. They were all paid $20 in gold, and they made the announcement with the missionaries at the time. This is it, our culture is done with. We no longer practice our old ways anymore. So my grandfather was born in 1901. So if that cultural center had gone through, all of this would have been put on the table. We would have had a whole team of people working on it. But unfortunately, they went to the two band councils. And the band council said, no, we don't want nothing to do with that. That's fine, thank you. And the Port Corporation was going to put $17 million toward the development of this. 2011. So Maalsk, or narratives, are usually stories that are passed down. My dad had a lot of good experiences with that. He said when they were sitting around by the fire, when they used to go up in October, they'd leave the village, they'd park their boat, and they'd travel the rest of the way up to Adaawx by canoe. He said it used to take them approximately 14 days. Now we can drive up there and be in the village site with about an hour and a half or so. Drive up and take a jet boat up there, and you can go right there. Dad shared a lot of stories of his travels up there, and I asked him what his earliest memories were. I do have some art that illustrated, but I'm not organized to right now to share that, but I'll share the story that he shared with me. He was 4 years old, going up Adaawx. Took him 14 days to travel up there. He said when they were traveling back one time, his grandfather stopped, and he said grandfather stood up, and he hollered, Łagigyet Tsm'syen, sat down, and the next one did that. And they backed their canoe up, and he said there was a little carved figure on the beach. And I said, Dad, what the heck, what's Tsm'syen? He said, it's a nach. I said, what did you guys do? He said, we all got out of the canoe, and then we sang. I said, I didn't know the words to it, but all the other people sang. And they left a little offering on the beach. I said, what was that all about? He gave me the name of the village, and he said it was by Łagigyet. I said, oh, river of little small frogs? I said, yeah. He said, there's a little carved figure there. And he said, you know where there's a boulder right in the middle of the river? And he said, you have to take the canoe around there. He said, what they're doing is they're doing an offering to the nach, and requesting safe travels downriver. And he said, so he was sitting in the bow of the canoe, and there's this big boulder. He said they were going straight for it. He said it scared him so badly, he put his head down. And he said the current from the river pushed the canoe just off to the side, so they just skinned by the side of the boulder. And Adaawx is a pretty fast, noisy river. And I've actually gone right up to the headwaters because I was always curious about all these stories I've heard. Now I've gone up Stu. So my dad was supposed to be made luckily hike. There is proper protocol to be made to stand in two tribal groups. and have two names and two sets of crests. This is my dad in 1955, a year before I was born. My dad was born Percy Bryant. His father was Edward Bryant and Mildred. And James was born James Green. He was adopted by Herbert Bryant, my grandfather's uncle, and put the last name Bryant on him. When my dad was born, his mother hemorrhaged, and his grandmother took him in. And after 2 years, she got too attached to him and didn't want to let him go. And they registered him in Duncan. When my dad filed for his retirement, when he turned 65, he filed for his old age pension. And a lady on the other end of the phone from the government asked him, "What are you doing in Prince Rupert?" He said, "I've lived here my entire life." He said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, we have you registered in Duncan." What they did was they registered him there so that when they came for the residential school kids, he didn't exist up here. And he said out of pretty much his whole life, he said he was only in the village for 2 weeks out of the whole year. So he did the whole cycle. He was up at Adaawx and up at Gwi for the winter, come down and go up Red Bluff up at Łagigyet, I forget the Tsm'syen name for it. And then they lived in a longhouse out at Łagigyet, out what they renamed Dundas. And he said as a kid, he used to go out there and it had ladders that went up, and he said he was responsible to move the ala, the smoke hole board. When the wind changed direction, you had an open fire. So he had to move the ala for his grandfather. So anyways, there's 9 of us. My brother Ed was the youngest. When he was born, my dad had made a promise to our grandparents that Ed would go to them as someone that would look after them when they got old. He was raised by the elders of his time. Our grandfather went through dictionaries in English. He wanted to learn these terms. And Ed wanted to learn a lot of Somali, so Ed learned the expansive parts of the language. He doesn't speak fluently. When he went to school, a lot of kids were punished for speaking the language. They were discouraged from speaking the language. And that's why we're kind of in the shape we're in today. My dad didn't want me to learn it. My mom didn't want me to learn it because they knew when we were in residential school and we were in public schools, a lot of the kids would get punished for speaking their own language. So very, very discouraged. This is basically the same stuff, but it outlines all the 19 tribes and all the ones on the bottom that don't exist anymore. Some of them were broken up, some of them were amalgamated, some of them changed names. For instance, the Gwi Gwinaath recorded as being, they were the most warlike tribal group amongst the Tsm'syen at contact, and after that they decided they didn't really have much use for them anymore, so they decided to break them up and send them to different nations. Some of them went to the Tsm'syen, Łagigyet for one, great earthquake, Adaawx for another, that little lightning. Some of them went up to Wet'suwet'en. I bumped into a lot of this stuff over a period of time from learning from culturally intact individuals that told me this information. They said, "Oh, you know that this individual used to be Tsm'syen." They said they came out of a group called the Gwi Gwinaath. I said, "Oh, you know about them, huh?" I said, "Yeah." So, well enough now, so we've actually forgotten, we've gotten into this reserve mentality. We talk about people coming from Kitchata, from Kitchata. "Oh, you're from there, you're from that reserve, you're no relation to us. Oh, you're Niska, you're not, we're not part of you." My dad always told us that we're interrelated everywhere. We're not separate from anybody. He said we're all originally one people. And reserve mentality, the school, the band councils have taught us that we're individuals. We're only this tribal group. For instance, Metlakatla calls themselves Metlakatla First Nations. Łagigyet calls themselves Łagigyet First Nations. And they don't know how they're integrated and supposed to be together. We're all Wilnath, they're interwoven, interrelated matrilineal blood ties us together throughout the whole coast. 1850, man Smogat Łagigyet is recorded in fort journals as visiting his father, Smogat Tibasa in Kitchata, Luxta, Lachoy, place of morning song. They renamed it Tugwell Island right now. It was always a camping spot. When Kitchata came up to meet with the Tsm'syen, they camped on that island out there. And again, I just laid this out for my own purposes. A lot of people have even forgotten a lot of the words for Otsin, our spirit, Łagigyet, our personal empowerment. And at some point in time, we'll get into details of all this, but right now we're just kind of giving you an introduction to some of the basics here. When we went and did the workshop with Łagigyet, he laid this all out. It's in their dialect, and it's just something that we have to switch over into our Somalia. First 10 minutes of the talk, he talked about modern issues and about, I had no idea about who he was or what he was about. The translation of his name is Łagigyet. I asked the old man about what he knows, and Gerald questioned him a little bit too, and he knew all about the cedar bark envelope for the Hayetsk. Hymas actually comes out of the Heltzuk. His father was Himas Hamjit, and his mother was Sigadamnak Simhayetsk. Chester Moore carries that name up there. Smogit Hymas from the Tsm'syen had a sister married into Niska, and he says, when you have a sister, put that name Hymas on. So Chester Moore started talking about his history, about his upbringing. Said when he was 6 years old, he was all packed up, shined his shoes, had his suitcase, and he said his grandparents came and took him out of line. He said, oh man, I was mad at them. He said, all my friends were going on the bus to go to residential school and they took me out of line. He said, I didn't realize what they did until I was in my 20s. They took him aside, started teaching him all the elders amongst the Niska, language, culture, history, crests, songs. He was a walking library. When he started laying this out, I went, I've never seen anybody explain this in such detail, and I wanted to know more. So he laid out the feasting, steps to feasting and protocols and the names and the status levels.